in 6 or 7 weeks. How confident are you you'll hit that figure? Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Nick. How are you? And thank you for that introduction. You're quite right. 1.3 million and rising. A quarter of over 80-year-olds have been vaccinated. Yep. In a couple of weeks' time, those people will have that protection. It is a challenging target, no doubt, that the Prime Minister has quite rightly set us. The NHS in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have got a very clear delivery plan. We started with hospitals. We then rolled out into what are called primary care networks, so 5 or 6 GP surgeries coming together in an area, about 50,000, deciding who will lead and then going out there and vaccinating their community and also getting into the care home as well in their area. And that will grow even further. And then we're going to add the national vaccination centres, so sports halls and stadia and so on. And then along with that, the community pharmacies and the independent pharmacies as well. And so it is a massive undertaking.
When will they be deployed? Because as you'll be aware, there are around 11,400 pharmacies across the country, and there is a story today saying that the government has snubbed an offer by some of those to get involved. What's the reality as you understand it, Minister?
So the reality is not at all, in the sense that we absolutely work with the pharmacy sector. The community pharmacies are coming online, as well as obviously the national vaccination centres, and then the independent sector as well. There are 2 challenges here, Nick. One is to effectively stand up more sites, and that requires both the vaccine itself and then the products that go with it and the technology and so on. And also another challenge, which I think is important to just remember, is to then optimize those sites that you've already set up. Because if you want to hit the big numbers, what you do is you make sure that the 730 sites you've already set up actually get to delivering more vaccine, more jabs into arms more quickly, as well as setting up new sites at the same time. So we work with the community pharmacy sector and the independent sector on this, and you will see that coming through in the next days and weeks. It is a big target, no doubt, but from Monday to Monday, so 4th of January to 11th of January, you're going to see a massive uplift in numbers again, and then the week after that more so. The Prime Minister not only has set us a big target, but have quite rightly committed as of next week that we'll publish daily data so the nation can see, your listeners can see our performance and judge our performance as well. Now, the focus is very much on the 4 categories that we'll offer those vaccinations to from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation by mid of February. And I think I'm confident that the NHS has got a really clear plan for that. The military are embedded in there. Brigadier Phil Prosser, big shout out for him, of 101 Logistics Brigade, is absolutely central to that delivery plan.
Yes.
And we will together, we've had a tremendous response, by the way, to the volunteer campaign through both the National Volunteering Service, St John's Ambulance, and of course NHS professionals.
All of which is music to the ears of my listeners, but unfortunately a different chord is struck by the news that Public Health England has decided it won't work on Sundays, or indeed certain cut-off points even if supplies are running low. When will that be changed? That's not acceptable, is it, Minister?
So I just want to put on record and commend Public Health England and the NHS, because they were vaccinating it through Christmas and the New Year as well. In terms of the actual warehousing, which is what Public Health England hold the vaccines, we work with them. Up until now, we've had 0 problems in terms of deliveries as we've requested them go out.
Why aren't they working? I'm sure you work Sundays. I have no doubt the Prime Minister works Sundays. Why aren't they?
Absolutely. No, they will absolutely. The contractor who's running the warehouse operation for Public Health England is working with us, with the NHS team who've put this plan in place to make sure that all deliveries are there on time as we requested.
So they are working Sundays?
They will work whatever days we need them. Public Health England will make sure that happens every single day. Every vaccine delivery that we request will happen. The NHS has got a very clear plan and an infrastructure for this that I think...
Okay, so the headline is wrong. The headline is Public Health England will work on Sundays if required. We can lay that to rest.
Yes, absolutely.
OK. You and other senior members of the government will be in the House later today talking about the new regulations which has been voted on. And it was indicated to us that they would run until the middle of next month, February. In reality, I understand the legislation is dated to run until March the 31st. So the truth is we are going to be in this lockdown until April 1st. Is that correct?
So the review, obviously, as you know, happens every 2 weeks. The way that this will work is if, and it's a massive challenge, but I'm absolutely confident that the NHS have got this plan that you and I've just been discussing. If we begin to vaccinate and protect those 4 categories that we've been set out, we're in a very different place mid-February in terms of both hospitalisation and, as Chris Whitty described it last night in the press conference, and of course in terms of deaths.
But why date the legislation to the end of March, Minister?
Well, as I said to you, the none more so than that the Prime Minister would wish to see these non-pharmaceutical interventions lifted as soon as possible. In terms of our legislation, they effectively come to an end as soon as we are at mid-February, is my understanding. Right. And of course, the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, is the first person that would want to see these NPIs lifted as soon as possible, as we get to that inflection point, as the PM has described, right, between vaccinations of the most vulnerable and community spread.
Let me ask you last couple of questions. Not only are you vaccines minister, which if that's not enough, you're also, of course, business minister, and there are many within the so-called excluded UK, broadly around 3 million people, who say that despite Rishi Sunak's best endeavours, they were missed out last March, they were missed out in subsequent reviews, and they're arguing that the announcements yesterday by your colleague, the Chancellor, they're still missing out, and there are people now who've gone almost a year without cash. Minister.
Thank you, Nick. Just for your listeners, really important to know that my absolute focus is on vaccine deployment. My other responsibilities have actually been shared out by other ministerial colleagues in the Department for Business, because I don't want people to think that I'm actually right, still sort of distracted in any way from this mammoth task that I've been set by the Prime Minister. But look, Rishi Sunak, I think, has put in coming on to £280 billion now.
But people have still been missed out, Mr. Zahawi.
It is difficult on everyone, right? And people have support in lots of other ways, including...
It's more difficult if you haven't got any cash coming in. I mean, that really is difficult. Fortunately, I'm still earning. You're still earning. We're very fortunate. Our cash is still coming in. There are blokes and women listening. They've had no earnings for 9 months. I appreciate now you're in charge of vaccines, but you were there. You will know this. Surely you need to speak with the Chancellor. Someone needs to speak with the Chancellor.
No, look, I absolutely understand, and I see the campaigns from people who are, who feel quite rightly hard done by, and feel that they haven't got enough because, for whatever reason, they don't fall into the category of working, in for themselves, in the way that 2+ million people who are self-employed get the help that they need. But there are additional help for them, both in terms of what we do in terms of welfare, mortgage help, and of course help with rent as well.
All right. Finally, Minister, what can you tell me about a company called Warren Medical Limited?
I can tell you very precisely that my wife had looked at a property project to invest in a brain injury rehabilitation centre as a property investment. It didn't happen. I declared it, by the way, to the Perm Sec at Bay, and that company is actually in the process of being cancelled because the project actually didn't happen.
Right. It was initially incorporated in June last year under the name Zahawi Warren Limited, and then was changed just 24 hours later to its current title. Presumably you sought to take your name off it. Why?
Not at all. Not at all. My wife runs many businesses, all with the Zahawi name on them.
Well, not this one, not Warren Medical.
Correct. But I declared it, as I said, to the Perm Sec because it was a property investment project into a place called Warren House, funnily enough, but never happened.
See. So it's not involved in the distribution or supply of any drugs or any kit or anything like that?
zero involvement in supply, anything into government. Nothing that my wife runs or my family runs has anything to do with doesn't supply anything to do with government at all. And also, I'd go further and say to you that my cousin is the consultant anaesthetist in the NHS. That he does do for the government. I commend him for that.
OK. Finally, in a broad government career, you've also served in the education department. There's enormous pressure, of course, on how they're going to work the new exam system. What ideas might you put forward as to how our youngsters will be assessed this summer? And do you think Gavin Williamson is fit for post?
Well, the Secretary of State for Education is going to make a statement today on the exams for those who are taking A-levels or GCSEs. And I think rightly so that he will work with the regulator, with Ofqual, to make sure that those students get the recognition they deserve in a very difficult year.
Right. And what grade would you give Mr. Williamson for the handling of this?
Yes, of course.
No, what grade would you give him, Mr. Would you give him a C+? What would you give him?
I think Gavin has been working very hard in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, so is my dishwasher. But what would you give Mr. Williamson as a grade? C+? B-?
Nick.
Nadhim.
Closing schools is a last resort for this government, for the Prime Minister and for the Secretary of State for Education, because we know how important it is that children get the education they need, which is why we've put so much effort into online learning. 500,000 laptops were delivered before Christmas by Gavin Williamson.
Well, they weren't delivered by him, but obviously by his department. OK, lastly, I'm giving him a C+, Mr. Zahawi. Do you think that's a fair grade?
I think you're being unfair to him, because I think he's doing a very tough job in very difficult circumstances in a pandemic which other countries are having to go through similar decisions. I was listening last night to a program where our colleagues in Israel, who've done a tremendous job with vaccination, are also looking this week at national lockdown and school closures. Same difficult debates happening all around the world. And Gavin is doing a tremendous job, and he'll make a statement later today.
Good luck to you and all your colleagues as well in getting that vaccines out in the hands of the necessary clinical staff. Thank you for your time. Vaccine Deployment Minister Nadhim Zahawi appearing on LBC, where at 5 minutes after 8 news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, England's third national lockdown has now become law before MPs vote on the new regulations later. They include an order to stay at home except for limited reasons to tackle rapidly rising COVID-19 cases. It's estimated on average 1 in 50 people in England have the disease, rising to 1 in 30 in London. Chris Hobson from NHS Providers says many hospitals are close to capacity.
It's not just in London, the south east and the east of England. It's also in the southwest, the north